I have this saying of function first, fancy later, because I am someone who likes having a beautiful classroom. But when it comes to having a functional classroom, that is far more important, not only for your day-to-day, but for your students' day-to-day. And when it comes to having a classroom where you can all work together, one of the biggest mistakes I do see teachers making is focusing on appearances and aesthetics first, rather than thinking about, okay, what systems and routines do I need in place for this particular context, for this particular class?
Welcome to Rainbow Skies for Teachers, the go-to show dedicated to teachers who want to make a big difference in education. Whether you're in your first few years or well into your teaching career, we are here to inspire, support, and empower you with bite-sized tips, simple strategies, and the motivation to lead an education revolution, one classroom at a time.
We're Ashley and Alicia from Rainbow Sky Creations, two Aussie teachers who love all things teaching and learning. We are here to help you thrive as you work toward making an impact in your students' lives while loving your life as a teacher.
We are here to help you bring joy, simplicity, and creativity into your classroom on the daily, because
there are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable.
Let's get into today's episode.
Rainbow Sky Creations acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we have recorded this podcast on, the Dharawal and Whadjuk Noongar people. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures.
Hello. Welcome back to Rainbow Skies for Teachers. I'm really excited about this episode because, call it nerdy, but organisation gets me excited. I love being organized. I love organizing all of the things. I love systems and routines. I'm sure you've probably picked that up if you've been listening to the podcast for a while. But there's one thing about organization that I think we all need to know. Whether you are very organized or you don't feel like you're organized at all, there is always something that you can learn. And the best hacks or the best things I've ever put into action when it comes to organization in my teacher life or my home life, I have actually learned from other people. I remember listening to a podcast with a lady who had a lot of children. And one thing that I find quite hectic in my mum life is getting the lunches organized for my children for the next day. And they bring home their lunch boxes and you've got to wash out the lunch boxes and then they've got to dry and then, you've got to pack them. And it's just a lot of steps. And I like to be efficient, right? Anyway, this mum suggested that you have 2 lunchbox per child, exactly the same, so that one can come home and go in the wash, and if you have a busy day and you forget to wash it or whatever, that's fine because you always have that second backup lunchbox and you can pack it and get it ready for the kids' school. And, it might be a little bit overboard, it might be a little bit extravagant, but that is an organizational hack that has really worked for me and makes my life so much easier, and it just releases some of that pressure. And I think today, in this episode, when we talk to Jamiela, she's just going to give us some really simple, actionable ways that we can be a little bit more organized in our classrooms that release that pressure. Nothing she says is going to be like, oh my God, this is the newest idea. But that's the best part of it. It is simple, it is straightforward, and anybody can do it. You don't have to be the most organized person in the world to implement some of these strategies. Like, this is real life and anyone can do these strategies. So I'm really excited to have her here on the podcast. I think that you're going to really enjoy this episode, and I think you're going to feel seen too because we talk very much about teacher life and all of the things that happen as a teacher. So let me stop my chattering and introduce Jamiela from The Organised Teacher. Jamiela, let's start by asking you, are you naturally an organized person?
I really, really, really want to say yes, but I'm not. And I had this realization because it was about thinking that I come across as this organized person. I talk about organization all the time, but I've realized it's because I'm not that organized and I need the systems to function. I need the routines. I need the structure. Without those, it all turns to mud. I am not a functional person without my systems and routines. So as much as I would love to say that I am a naturally organized person in and out of the classroom, that is absolutely not the case. It's not something that I think is always easily achievable. And I know that impression can be a lot of the commentary I tend to get online is, well, of course it's easy for you. You're always organized. Definitely not the case. And I think that's a lot of pressure that can be placed on teachers when it comes to their classrooms. So no, for me, definitely not a naturally organized person at all. I had to train myself to become that way.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So that is not what I was expecting this answer to be at all. Coming from a naturally organized person myself, I feel like I am very organized. I organize everyone and everything, including Alicia, which I actually think she secretly likes that I organize her. But even as a naturally organized person, I really resonate with what you're saying in that you need to have the routines and those structures in place in order for things to flow easily. And I think that's why I'm naturally an organized person, because I find that when things flow, life is just so much better, not as overwhelming. They get all of the things, and there's always so much going on as a teacher, just as a human being in the world, that putting these structures into place can really be helpful. But the other thing that I was going to say around you not being a naturally organized person is that perhaps that puts you in a better driver's seat to teach people. I always find that with maths, for example, we make a lot of maths resources and people always say, oh, you must be like amazing at maths. And I've got a dad who was a maths teacher and he's a great mathematician, but he's not the best mathematician. And I, by no means, am an amazing mathematician either. But I think my skill is breaking it down because I know when it's tricky, how to break it down for people to learn how to do it. And maybe that's the same with you with organization. Am I on the right track?
100%. It's funny you mentioned your dad because my mum always likes to tell this story about how me as a teenager, as a child, having the most disorganized room. I'm one of 5 kids at that house. And she said out of all of them, I was the absolute worst, would always shove things under the bed, shove things wherever they were hidden and say that it was clean and tidy and organized. So it's funny how our parents can have that influence on us, but exactly that. I think that because I've had to learn and teach myself how to make the systems and the routines so that I can become more efficient for myself, that has, exactly as you've said, put me in a position where I know what it feels like to be unorganized and to feel that pressure and that overwhelm of feeling like you haven't got it all together, and taking really simple and basic steps to put things into place. And that's why when I always talk about classroom organization specifically, I don't like to have the fancy systems and the fancy routines because it's too much. I've tried them, especially back in the hype days of Pinterest,
Yeah.
especially when I first started my teaching career. I had all those systems, you name it, like brag tags. Do you know how many brag tags I made from scratch thinking that was a great behavior management organization system? It took me forever. It did not work. Just little things like that you find the pressures of. And so stripping it all back, and since becoming a mum, that has really also shifted the need for simplicity. So not just simplicity in the routines of the classroom, but the way that you operate around that so you can spend less time in the classroom around other things that, shouldn't be taking up so much time when it comes to organization, so that you can come back to your life outside of the classroom as well. No, it's put me in a good position to be able to take what I've learned through my own experiences of needing to find the simplest ways of doing things and sharing that now with all the teachers that I can, because it's so important.
Yeah, simplicity is important, especially when it comes to organization, because we can overcomplicate things. And that's when it can get even more overwhelming.
100%. Definitely agree.
So tell us, what was the moment that you realized teachers needed the support around getting organized?
I think it definitely comes back to going on maternity leave with my first son. I was always that person who collected for my classroom, thinking that more meant I was more organized. Always having things on hand meant I was more prepared. Always having things stocked up meant I was ready for anything, until it came time to pack up that classroom, going on that leave and realizing that I just had so much stuff that I didn't actually need, want, or really even use. And it wasn't making me feel any more organized. In fact, it was making me feel more overwhelmed with just everything that I was trying to manage and organize and store. And I guess it wasn't really that obvious until I had it all out in front of me when it came to packing up for that leave. So with the Organized Teacher Collective, it was always around that idea of creating, these beautifully labeled and coordinated classrooms. That was something that I loved doing, coming from that mindset of more, more, more. And then it wasn't until that leave that I shifted in realizing, okay, hang on, what is organization actually about? And it's about making your life easier, simpler, not harder. And so that's where that shift came into supporting other teachers around that concept of having less. And I was, from that mind shift that I was seeing that amongst my colleagues, and whether they were newer beginning teachers, whether they were more experienced teachers, a lot of teachers tend to have that natural habit of collecting. And I don't like to use the word hoarding, but collecting and preparing and feeling like just in case especially when it comes to, craft things and bits and bobs and things that you bring in from home thinking that you'll use one day, and you open your cupboard 5 years later and realize they're shoved up the back, still untouched, that kind of thing. And it comes from a good place of thinking that you're going to be prepared and ready for anything. But I think there's a balance and a fine line where it starts to not enhance your organization, but rather hinder it. Having more isn't always necessarily better when it comes to being organized. And that was a big lesson that I had to learn as someone who always thought that if someone was throwing something out in the staff room, oh, I can use that, I'll take that. And then it never got used, never got past the cupboard doors once they were put inside. That was a big shift that I had to learn for myself, and something that I saw amongst my colleagues as well. And then now in the online space, as I started to share that through the Organised Teacher as well. So that was a huge learning curve.
Yeah. So more doesn't mean better. In my last couple of years of teaching full time, I shared a grade, and she was next door with a teacher who was amazing. She was much older than me, but she was, in inverted commas, a hoarder, as you would say. I know you don't like that to use that word, but she collected a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
So it was great for me because I could have bare minimum in my classroom, and whenever I needed something, she would always have it. And she'd come up with a story like she'd have these blocks and say, you know what? They were throwing these blocks out in the maths resource room, and I saw them and I thought, they're too good to throw out. So I took them. And I'd be like, great, they're fantastic for this one lesson, but then I won't use them again. So I'd use them and then I just hitch them back to her, and everyone did that on staff. There might be other people out there that you can borrow things from. You don't necessarily need to have it all in your classroom, because there's going to be people out there that can't get rid of things. Yeah.
Oh, and look, there's always a place. It's not about getting rid of everything, right? It's just about being intentional and purposeful with what you are keeping, and things that, in that example that you've just shared, something that is multi-use and multi-purpose is going to afford you much better use and practicality out of that item, rather than something that you can really use once. And that's kind of it. You don't need 17 of everything. Is there somewhere else in the school that it can be stored for shared use as well? Not everything has to be in your space. I understand every school is different and, contexts are all different. But yeah, not needing to have everything on hand all the time isn't a bad thing.
No. And that teacher, she used to always say, this resource, it's good for, and then she could list like at least 7 things, I'm not kidding you, about how she could use that particular resource. So she had a reasoning behind why she kept all of these things. So that's great. But what you're trying to say is that if we've only got one reason for it, or if it's there because you think, oh, it could be good one day in the future, maybe it's not the thing to keep.
I kind of have a 12-month rule.
Yeah,
and maybe extend that to 24 months, maybe if you're someone who tends to stay on a grade for 2 years in a row. I know that tends to happen a lot. 12 to 24-month rule around, look, if you haven't used it in the last 1 to 2 years and you don't think you're really going to honestly use it in the next 1 to 2, it's time to go. And time to go doesn't always mean chucking it in the bin. It can mean donating it. It can mean seeing if another teacher would use it better instead, as we've been speaking about. It can see if, there would be a local school or learning centre that would benefit from resources. It could be repurposing something. It doesn't always mean being wasteful. I think that's a mindset shift around decluttering, which is something I speak a lot about. And I think decluttering can often have that connotation with throwing things away. It doesn't always need to be such a negative thing. Things can be rehomed, repurposed, reused, just doesn't always have the best fit for you and your classroom at that time. And rather than holding up space in your classroom, it can be useful for someone else.
Yeah. Tell me on the flip side of that. So yes, I like the idea of talking about it being wasteful, in that we don't want to always be chucking things out, but from the other side, buying things or collecting things. What's your viewpoint, or what advice can you give to teachers when they're thinking about purchasing resources, especially with all of these websites that have popped up just recently? Like, we're in Australia, for the people who are listening to this, up in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can't really get our hands on cheap resources like you can in other parts of the world. So since the rise of websites like Shein and Temu, which I know are not very good for human rights and they're not very good for the environment. But that aside, teachers are being able to access things a lot cheaper than what they would normally hear in the shops. What's your viewpoint on gathering things?
Yeah, and this is a big conversation online, and it always invites a lot of strong opinions, I find, either way. I have to say that I definitely used to be someone who would drop a pretty penny whenever I saw something shiny. It was definitely something where, I don't mean to stereotype here, I'm just speaking from my own experience, but being younger with disposable income and no children all the time, what was I doing? I was passionate about my job, and buying things for my classroom made me feel happy. It made me feel good. I didn't purchase out of a place of pressure. I didn't purchase out of a place of necessity. I think, speaking of Northern Hemisphere, I know that a lot of teachers in different contexts do have to purchase things for their own classroom and their self-funded classrooms. I think that's a different discussion.
Yeah.
Speaking here in my own context as an Australian teacher in what we would consider a relatively well-funded kind of schooling system, in my experience, I still purchase things out of a want, not a need. Having said that, if I could go back, I wouldn't purchase so much. I think that where schools have a budget, you should be using that where you can. I think a lot of teachers, when there is a school budget, the items belong to the school, right? And I think that's a difference there. I know lots of teachers like to keep their own items when they purchase them. Look, I don't like to swing on this debate. Either way, it's hard because I'm not here to tell you what to do with your money and how to spend it. If something makes you feel good to do that, do that. But where I will come back to in what I'm going to tell you about is, do you actually need, want, or use that item? The 12 to 24 month rule, but speaking about it from a longevity standpoint. So
Yes.
is that something that's going to last for the foreseeable future? Does it have the durability that it requires to be in a primary classroom or any classroom? Kids are going to be using that day in, day out. Is it going to stand that? Is it something that you're going to need to replace frequently? Is that going to be cost effective? Are you open to spending more money on things? I think you can open up a whole can of worms when it comes to spending money on your classroom. And at the end of the day, my standpoint is, if it makes you feel good, no one needs to tell you what you can and can't do, but really make those purposeful considerations when you're deciding what to bring into your classroom. Because you're right, clutter can build up, not so much from what we have in our classroom as much as what we bring into it.
Yes.
And I think that's where, where we're not taking these regular declutterings like I encourage teachers to do as well, that's where things start to build up. So I know that I probably, again, being someone who probably should be naturally organized, and speaking of someone who's all about classroom organization, might have had a stronger opinion on it, but it isn't something that I like to swing too hard either way, because I do feel like at the end of the day, it's a personal decision what you do with your money, what you buy. I just have some considerations that I like people to think about before they do.
Yeah. I think that durability piece is a great consideration, because we do need things. Of course, we need things as teachers. Back when I started teaching, because I'm just a little bit older than you, we didn't have a currency of money. So people weren't really going out and buying a lot for their own classrooms as teachers, but we had a currency of time, because things weren't as easily accessible. There weren't activities online and what have you like we have today. And I remember, I've told this story on the podcast before, so I'll make it quick, but I had a kindergarten class. They were a very unregulated class. And I decided one school holidays, I think it was the winter ones, that I was going to make stress balls for every child in my class. I bought balloons, I bought rice. So it didn't cost me very much. But it cost me a lot of time in making these stress balls. I filled the balloons, and, my roommate at the time, she was in real estate, going, "What are you doing?" I made these. They took probably a week to do enough for the entire class. I gave them out on the first day, used them as a regulation tool, a little bit ahead of my time, I might say, because I feel like these things have come right back around. But I'm telling you, about 3 of them split on that first day, and then I had rice to clean up. But not only that, they weren't used in the end because they weren't durable enough. And I had wasted a lot of my time. So whether it's currency as time, currency as money, you can look at it in both ways. And I think that durability piece is really, really important. Those stress balls got thrown out in the bin.
And that's devastating. I think, as I mentioned before, the brag tags that I made
Yes,
in my
a good
first year
example.
teaching, you have all these good intentions behind it. And that's the thing, when it comes to that debate about doing things for your classroom, buying things for your classroom, a lot of it can be a character assassination. And it's not about that. Teachers care. Teachers do things because they care. And because you want to or because you don't want to, doesn't mean you are any more or less of a teacher. Doesn't mean someone is better of a teacher than someone who doesn't do things or buy things for their classroom. But we do things out of a place of caring and wanting. Coming back to that durability, purpose, intention, and making sure that, it's going to be something that's for a reason, serving a purpose, not just for you, but for your kids as well, for your students.
Yeah. All right, let's switch gears a little bit. Teaching is naturally chaotic, as I'm sure you and I and everyone who is listening can agree. What are some of the biggest organizational mistakes or struggles teachers face?
I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record, but focusing on some of the things that tend to look like organization than things that are actually organization. And again, I have been a massive culprit of this in the past. Again, when I had more time to spend on my classroom, but it's focusing on things that are more about aesthetics, focusing on things that are more about how your classroom looks, how your classroom look in terms of its setup and displays, rather than how it functions. I have this saying of function first, fancy later, because I am someone who likes having a beautiful classroom. But when it comes to having a functional classroom, that is far more important, not only for your day to day, but for your students' day to day. And when it comes to having a classroom where you can all work together, one of the biggest mistakes I do see teachers making is focusing on appearances and aesthetics first, rather than thinking about, okay, what systems and routines do I need in place for this particular context? For this particular class? What are the things that happen on a day-to-day basis in this classroom? And also the physical aspect of that particular classroom. Some teachers move every single year, some teachers move every other year. But what you'll find is that even moving between classrooms within a school, different classrooms are set up in different ways. So you need to think about how you're coming in and out of that classroom in terms of your routines, what your kids do each day, your daily routine and structure flowing through the day, and how that all functions in first before you think about what displays and things you're going to set up around that. Because I do believe in functional decor as well, but thinking about those systems and routines and functionality first before we get into the fancy stuff, that is one of the things where I think our focus can shift when it comes to teachers thinking about organization in the classroom.
So can you give me an example of a functional first over fancy? 'Cause I'm really liking this idea.
Yeah, of course. You think about your bulletin displays. And I, as someone who creates fancy bulletin displays, such as, I've got some seasonal things and things like that, I think they have a place when you've got the space, when you've got the extra walls, when you're welcoming students in, maybe back from a break or a holiday. That can be a nice thing to have. However, if that is taking up space that could be otherwise used for learning displays, interactive learning walls, shared workspaces where you've got co-created work samples and text and things like that, that is where I think the function of that space is far more important than the fancy side. Having the ability for your classroom to be, yes, a beautiful, welcoming space for you and your students, because really it is your space as much as it is theirs. You're all in there learning together every day. No one likes the thought of being in a dark, gloomy dungeon. So definitely when you can enhance things with intention and purpose, by all means. But if that's going to take away from the space and the purposes of a functional learning environment where the learning takes precedent over what the classroom looks like, that's where I think we start to have issues.
Okay, so I'm loving this idea of like organized, but also functional. In your opinion, where should teachers really focus their energy for the biggest impact with creating these classrooms that are functional?
I will always come back to, when it comes to functionality, I have a set of classroom organization principles that I like to follow, and I call them like my FAVS principles. And it doesn't quite spell FAVS, but bear with me. The F is for functionality. So function first. A is for accessibility. Thinking about the accessibility in terms of the physical accessibility in your classroom. Can you easily get to things? Can your students easily get to things and access what they need? Can they easily function in the space so that you're not always the one having to go and get things and retrieve them? So we've got functionality, accessibility. V is for visibility. So when it comes to your displays and your whole classroom layout and setup, we're thinking about the visibility. Can your students see what they need to see from their seats, from their desks? Can they easily see your displays? Are labels clear? Are your signs and posters that they need to access for their learning, are they clear? Can they easily see the smartboard, the whiteboard, without having to crane their neck like I remember having to do in primary school as a student myself? So thinking about visibility from all aspects, not only the visual side of displays, labels, posters, but what your students can actually see and access from where they are, where their learning is taking place. And then so that's FAV and the S. So that's what I mean. I've skipped the E there. Maybe I'll come up with an E one day. But the S is for simplicity. So coming back to, I think, everything we've been talking about so far, keeping it simple. So any system, any routine or structure that you're putting in place, keep it simple. You don't have all the time in the world as a teacher, which everyone knows. You all know that, to be spending on things that take not only hours and hours to set up, like we've touched on already, but hours to implement and to actually action in your classroom as well. If it's something that takes too long to set up and go through each day, it's not simple enough for you, for your students. Everyone needs to be able to understand it. And I think those FAVS principles really work hand in hand together, and they do offer quite a lot of overlap to each other. So going again, that's functionality, accessibility, visibility, and simplicity, all working harmoniously hand in hand to create what I believe is a truly organized classroom, which is a functional one.
They are great tips. I love how you've just put them together in a pretty bow. I was thinking, what could you use for the E? Maybe efficiency?
I was also thinking environmental, like something around. Yeah. And that comes back to our sustainability and durability chat before. So that's something I've been playing around with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't quite tie in, but it's a thought I've had.
I like that. Okay, so that all sounds good. But let's get into the nitty gritty of what happens to teachers in real life classrooms. And I'm just like going back to my first couple of years of teaching, and this was me. I was trying to juggle a million things. There weren't as many digital things that you have now, but there were so many physical papers. Now it's so many digital files. There's emails coming in. There's planning docs. You might have a term plan for English, but then you've also got a pacing guide, and then you've got to have your weekly reading groups plans. There's just things coming at teachers left, right, and centre, mostly around papers and digital files. What's your advice for managing this never-ending flow of information coming at you? Because this is beside the kids that are in your classroom too. This is just stuff that you're getting as an adult away from the teaching side of things.
Oh, of course. And you're right, it is never ending. And I have to say that for me personally, I like to come back to, I'm a pen and paper girl, and having that one central hub of my pen and paper planner, my teacher diary, that I like to use as my central hub for keeping track of even digital things like emails and phone calls I might have to make, or lesson plans that need uploading, data that needs entering. I like to have a central hub where I'm keeping track of all of that organization in that one place in my planner. That's the one thing I look at each morning or each planning period that I get to sit down and actually action my to-do list in the 5 minutes that the 1 hour planning session actually turns into.
Yeah.
But having that central hub first to keep track of everything in one place, even though, as you've mentioned, you've got things in your email folder, you've got things in your OneDrive, your Google Drive, that's for your planning, you've got things in the physical form sitting in your in tray. Definitely that one central hub first to keep all tracked and all together. That way, when you do go off and have to have all these fingers in different pies and things going on, you've still got that one thing that's keeping you all on track. And you're right, like these days, so much is digital, but paper is still very present. And especially in classrooms where you talk about, you've got permission notes coming in, you've got memos, you've got flyers, I know a lot of us still use physical lesson plans for annotations. As I mentioned, I'm a paper and pen person. And when I'm in the classroom, that's what I like to do as opposed to the digital note taking. I might be a dinosaur and have to start getting with the times, but there's just something about paper that's still sticking for me. But still having, again, when it comes to physical papers, that one central location where everything comes in for you to sort, rather than having the 10 spread out sporadic piles around your classroom that never really get looked at again or you lose. Having one central location. I know a lot of teachers don't have a desk these days. They like to have either the rolling carts or the stand-up move around desks. That's fine, but you can still implement a central location for keeping track and record of everything that you're doing. As I mentioned, that for me is my physical planner. And then also a central location for tracking the papers that are coming into your classroom that you're organizing. And that can be something as simple as those tiered drawer systems or shelving systems for papers that can just have a few different labels on. I like to categorize mine into things that I need to file, things that I need to action, or things that I need to make a copy of. Are generally 3 simple categories that you can look at when it comes to papers. And then when it comes to lesson plans and resources and things like that, I like to have another separate system for that. But again, it's that one central location for all of my lesson materials, resources, plans, things like that I'm using in terms of paper, rather than spreading it out in 5 different locations across the classroom. So that centrality of having that one place you can go to and know that everything you need is going to be there, or at least noted there, for you to refer to, I think really helps to bring it back to keeping it less overwhelming, keeping you more on track and keeping you clear on what needs to happen, what you need to do.
Yes. So if you're a digital person, you can do that digitally. But if you're a pen and paper person, you can do that by pen and paper. I still love my pen and paper too. Actually, I had a bit of a laugh when you were saying your 3 different trays to organize things. That's exactly how I organize my things too. Like to print, things that need to be copied, things that need to be filed away, and things I need to action. Back when I was in the classroom, I did it a lot more scrappy. I would just get the top of you know how your reams of paper are delivered in boxes? The lids,
Yep.
I would just turn them around and they would be my in trays because they would fit an A4 sheet of paper. Sometimes I'd have a fancy label on them. Sometimes I wouldn't. But if you don't want to go and buy in trays or whatever, you can use those.
Yeah, exactly. And that comes back to, keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Function first, fancy later.
Yes, that is exactly right. Function first, fancy later. Okay, so you've given us a lot of gems over the course of our conversation, like you're kind of just sneaking them in as we go, Jamiela, which I'm loving. But if teachers could only implement just one organizational system after listening to this podcast that would really help them transform their daily routine, what would you recommend?
I'd recommend a 5 to 10 minute daily reset. At the end of the day, when you're getting your students packed up, help them pack up their desks for the end of the day, they get all their belongings, they put things away. I feel like we can do that for ourselves as teachers too, but also getting your students to do that with you. They pack up their own things, right? And often whatever materials or resources were being used. But as we've talked about, the classroom is that shared space. So I think spending that 5 to 10 minutes that you would already be spending with your students packing up to be assigning roles if you need to, assigning jobs, having your students to help reset the classroom. You can spend that 5 minutes resetting your space, even if that's the 5 minutes that you take, after the students have left and after you've completed any final admin tasks of the day. But resetting and potentially even spending an extra 5 minutes setting up something for your first session the next morning can make such a difference when it comes to walking back into the classroom that following day, realizing that 1 or 2 tasks that you needed to do has already been done. And it's just taking off that little bit of pressure. I think it's something as simple. I know it can sound really simple and maybe not always practical, but if you can think about more often than not, consistency doesn't mean perfect. It just means keeping up with it. And so more often than not, if you can take that 10 minutes of an afternoon to reset, set something up for yourself for the next morning and making sure that when you're walking back in the following day, you're feeling something that little bit more fresh, that something has already been done. You're not walking into an immediate to-do list, can make such a difference when it comes to feeling that little bit more organized and on top of things.
That is fabulous advice. You said it sounds a little bit simple, but you're bringing us all the way back around to the beginning because that's how you started off. You were saying the simple ways are often the best ways. We don't need to overcomplicate things to help ourselves feel organized and be more organized.
No, and that's exactly, it came from that place of me, again, being that non-naturally organized person. I needed to find a system and routine for me that helped just in those small, easy to manage, doable ways each day. And that 10-minute end of day routine has just completely shifted that whole, not only how I feel when it comes to organization, but just in the way that it functions for me. I know those are my 2 favorite buzzwords, organization and functionality, but it really does all come back to that.
Yeah. Okay, so we started a tradition this year on the podcast where the person before you or another random guest leaves a random question for a future guest to answer. So I'm going to get your question when we finish the podcast, but I've got a question for you that someone else has left. Are you ready for it?
Hit me.
If you could choose one teaching related task never to do again, what would it be?
This might be the millennial in me, but phone calls. Good, bad, positive, negative, any kind of phone call makes my palms sweat and my knees shake. If I could never make a phone call again, I would love that.
I honestly wasn't expecting phone calls, but you bring a good point.
Yeah, there's just something about the phone waiting for them to pick up, hearing the ring. Like I said, even if I'm calling for a positive thing, it's just that nerve of what if the first thing I say is not right?
Yeah. Do you know what I don't like about phone calls? You never know if the person on the other end is just going to go on and on and on. Like, you don't know how long this
No.
is going to take.
And then if you need to leave a voicemail, have you ever left a voicemail but you've been cut off in the voicemail because you're
no.
rambling? And that,
Oh.
it's just too much pressure.
Oh, that's funny. All right. It has been an absolute pleasure having you. I've got one final question for you. It's kind of
Sure.
organizational related. Complete this sentence. Every teacher needs.
A classroom that works for them.
I love it. Jamiela, you've been a wealth of knowledge today. I think teachers are going to listen to this. They're going to feel seen. They're going to have little things that they can take away, which is fantastic. But tell us, where can they connect with you further if they want to learn more about getting their classroom organized and in tip-top shape?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. You can find me at the.organized.teacher on Instagram, or theorganizedteachercollective.com is my website.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that you picked up a few little things that you can do in your teacher life to make it that little bit easier. And if you want some more tips and strategies like we talked about today, go and check out Jamiela's Instagram. She's sharing them all the time, different things that you can do, and she just keeps it simple and straightforward. And that is what I really, really love about it. So thank you to Jamiela for being so open and honest about her own teacher life and sharing all of the goodness that she has to share. And thank you to you for listening. We are forever grateful for the teachers that come here and listen to the podcast. It really takes a special teacher to take time out of their own day to come and listen to a podcast about teaching and about educating to make them a better educator. So you are awesome, and don't forget it. We will see you here this time next week. We're here every week without fail. And until then, remember, there are rainbows ahead, my friend, and together we're unstoppable.